Jago Sevatarian, also known as the Prince of Crows and more commonly as Sevatar, was the first captain of the Night Lord's Traitor Legion during the course of the Great Crusade, as well as a significant portion of the Horus Heresy. Sevatar was commonly regarded as being one of the most skilled and uncompromising warriors throughout the ranks of the Legione Astartes, whose talents were regarded as being on par with Abaddon of the Sons of Horus, Ralderon of the Blood Angels, and Eidolon of the Emperor's Children, individuals who were equally regarded as being the greatest warriors of their respective legions. Such was Sevatar's skill at arms and willingness to utilize any tactic in battle, no matter how underhanded, that the Prince of Crows was the only legionary who was able to battle Sigismund, the first captain of the Imperial Fists Legion, who was considered by many to be one of the Imperium's greatest swordsmen, to a draw, a feat which Sevatar achieved after delivering a sudden and brutal headbutt to his opponent. Sevatar was also a highly potent psyker, although unlike many of the other psykers within the legions who sought to harness their abilities, Sevatar actively sought to suppress his gifts, fearing what could happen should his powers ever be unleashed. This would, for a time, result in Sevatar only utilizing his powers in an instinctive and reflexive manner. One such incident in this regard was shortly after the passing of the Emperor's Edict of Nicaea, a decree forbidding the Legione Astartes from utilizing the talents of psykers. Fel Zarost, the chief librarian of the Night Lords, would come to Sevatar following the passing of the edict, seeking confirmation from the first captain as to whether or not the Night Lords intended to disband their librarius. This would lead to Sevatar and Zarost engaging in a heated argument before eventually coming to blows. Zarost would have likely killed Sevatar had it not been for a reflexive blast of psychokinetic energy unleashed by the first captain, forcing the librarian back. Sevatar then banished Zarost from the Legion under pain of death. Following the onset of the Horus Heresy, Sevatar would prove notable for being the one to first utter the phrase, "Death to the False Emperor." During the course of the Thramas Crusade, the Night Lord's Legion were tasked with keeping the loyalist Dark Angels preoccupied and thus incapable of reinforcing terror against Horus's inevitable assault. However, Sevatar, along with a number of elite warriors from the Atramentar, would ultimately be captured by the Dark Angels following a failed assault upon the Legion's flagship, the Invincible Reason, with Sevatar in particular losing consciousness during the course of the battle as a result of his long-suppressed psychic abilities finally overcoming him. It was during his time in incarceration that Sevatar would unexpectedly befriend a young astropath named Altani, who would frequently utilize her telepathic abilities to secretly converse with him and ease the pain that the Astartes was experiencing due to his psychic abilities being now fully awakened. This pain was so great that Sevatar believed that his abilities were slowly killing him. Altani would eventually be caught conversing with the traitor, leading to the overseer of her astropathic choir viciously beating her to the point of her being crippled. When Sevatar learned of Altani's fate, a newfound sense of justice would awaken within the Night Lord. As he was being escorted to the prison transport vessel Remnant of Brotherhood, Sevatar, with Altani's aid, would escape from his jailers, but instead of making his way off the ship, Sevatar chose to head to the astropathic choir chamber in order to avenge Altani. Sevatar would garrote the Overseer with his own power lash, snapping the man's neck just as the Dark Angels entered the choir chamber in order to recapture him. Sevatar would then proclaim himself to be both justice and punishment before offering his unconditional surrender, and allowing the Dark Angels to return him to his cell. After being reincarcerated, Sevatar would ponder the possibilities of hunting down the true enemies of mankind, with this train of thought granting the Prince of Crows a newfound sense of focus, one that had eluded him for many long years. His final fate from here remains unclear. So, what fate could have befallen Sevatar? The first and, admittedly, most likely possibility is that Sevatar had simply perished. This idea in particular is one that has been commonly accepted by the majority of those Night Lords that survived the events of the Horus Heresy. This notion is loosely supported by the fact that sometime between the culmination of the Horus Heresy and the assassination of the Night Lord's Primarch Conrad Kurz, the rank of First Captain would be inherited by the Talon Master Zhou Sahal. Since Sevatar held this role within the Legion prior to Sahal, it would be fair to assume that the Night Lords would not consider it necessary to appoint another of the Legion's warriors to this particular rank unless Sevatar was deemed as being forever lost to the Legion. Within the novel Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, the apothecary Talos Valkorion muses to the Primarch that Sevatar is most likely dead following his capture during the Framas Crusade, despite the fact that none within the Legion had learned of his ultimate fate following his capture, although the warrior Zal maintained that Sevatar was indeed still alive. The novel Blood Reaver also appears to support the notion of Sevatar having perished during the final days of the heresy, as not only is it stated that the Atramentar Brotherhood had fractured following the death of Sevatar, but Captain Hellath, one of the Legion's fiercest and most loyal warriors, would state the following to Conrad Kurz as the Primarch slowly descended further and further into madness.
My prince, First Captain Sevatar is long dead. He died in the war.
Since Hellath was noted to be one of Kurz's most loyal followers, it seems unlikely that the captain would deliberately lie about such matters to its Primarch. As such, given with how dangerous a warrior Sevatar was, combined with the fact that he succeeded in escaping from his jailers on at least one occasion, it would be reasonable to assume that the Dark Angels would have come to the conclusion that Sevatar was simply far too dangerous to be kept alive, resulting in the Prince of Crows being unceremoniously executed. While Sevatar, as first captain of the Night Lords, may have been privy to valuable intelligence, such as traitor battle plans and orders, the potential rewards may not be worth the risk associated with keeping such a dangerous individual alive. Since the majority of the Dark Angels Legion would immediately set course for Terra upon learning that the world still stood against Horus, it seems that the most practical and pragmatic course of action for the Dark Angels Legion to take at this particular point in time would be to simply execute any prisoners that were confined upon their ships, so as to not risk any potential insurgencies should any Traitor Legion captives escape from their cells, especially with a warrior as cold, calculating, and deadly as Sevatar. However, it is potentially possible, albeit rather improbable, that Sevatar could have once again escaped from his incarceration. While such a prospect is, admittedly, somewhat unlikely, it is not entirely unfeasible. Following the Second Battle of Davin, which occurred as the Dark Angels, along with the Blood Angels and Ultramarines legions, attempted to make their way through the Ruinstorm, the Invincible Reason would sustain heavy damage, resulting in the Dark Angels making a detour to the Forge World of Thagria in order to facilitate repairs. It wouldn't be entirely unfeasible to speculate that Sevatar could have made his escape prior to or just after the Second Battle of Davin, assuming that the Dark Angels hadn't executed him before setting course for Terra. But if Sevatar had indeed escaped from custody, then what course of action could the Prince of Crows have undertaken? Some have suggested, given Sevatar's newfound sense of justice, in conjunction with his psychic abilities, that the Night Lord would become inducted into the ranks of the Grey Knights and even become one of its first Grand Masters. This is due in part to a few potential links between Sevatar and the Grand Master who had come to be known within historical records as Chiron. Chiron was noted to have some superficial similarities to that of Sevatar. The first of which is with an inscription upon Chiron's statue within the Grey Knight chapter's Tomb of the Eight, where several monuments were erected to pay respect to the first founding members of the chapter. The inscription upon Chiron's memorial, as detailed within the novel The Emperor's Gift, reads as follows:
Chiron, Grand Master of the Eighth Brotherhood, already you exalt me for my triumphs, when I ask only that you remember me for my treacheries. Victory is nothing more than survival. It carries no weight of honor or worth beyond what we ascribe to it. If you wish to grow wise, learn why brothers betray brothers.
Since Chiron Sevatar mentions brothers betraying brothers, this would seem to suggest that Chiron himself had originally served within the ranks of a traitor legion. Chiron's statue also holds within its grip a Nemesis Force halberd, which is wielded almost casually. As Sevatar's weapon of choice within the Night Lord's Legion was that of a spear-like Nostraman chainglaive, then it would stand to reason that he would make use of a weapon similar in form and function to one that he had already achieved mastery of. Sevatar was also documented to show disgust and even hatred towards demonic entities, as well as those individuals that had been possessed by such creatures. As detailed within the novel The First Heretic, when Sevatar and the rest of the Night Lords had witnessed the demonic transformations of the Gal Vorbak, elite warriors from the Wordbearers Legion who were amongst the first Astartes to form parasitic bonds with demons, Sevatar made his disgust known by spitting towards Argal Tal, with the acidic fluid landing by the Wordbearers' feet. Such disgust towards warp-tainted individuals could also, theoretically, be a factor in Sevatar joining the ranks of the Grey Knights. In addition, the sigil of the Grey Knights' 8th Brotherhood, a skull superimposed over a pair of crosses, is also evocative of the winged skull iconography of the Night Lord's Legion, with the crosses of the 8th Brotherhood sigil fulfilling the visual role of the wings in this particular instance. While this collected evidence may point towards Chiron having originally served as a member of the 8th Legion, this however does not mean that they were originally Sevatar. Indeed, as documented within the novel The Buried Dagger, while a Night Lord was certainly present within the Imperial Palace during the initial founding of the Grey Knights, this warrior was not Sevatar, but was instead none other than Fel Zarost, who had been recruited into the ranks of Malcador's Knights Errant following his banishment from the Legion. As such, it is all but a certainty that Chiron, if he was truly a former Night Lord, would be Fel Zarost as opposed to Sevatar. Others have suggested that Sevatar, as well as those members of the Atramentar that could have escaped from the Dark Angels alongside him, would go on to establish one of the most brutal of all Space Marine chapters, the Carcharodons. This is due to not only a number of genetic similarities between the Carcharodons and the Night Lords, such as pale skin and black eyes, but also due to the chapter's reverence of a mysterious figure known as the Forgotten One. This Forgotten One would decree that the chapter would spend its days in exile along the outer reaches of the galaxy, hunting down any and all threats to mankind in order to atone for their sins, similar to how Sevatar himself, as detailed within the audio drama The Long Night, would also ponder a future where he would hunt down the true enemies of humanity after murdering Altani's abusive overseer, as documented within the following passage.
He sits alone in the blackened stillness, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing. A sense of serenity cloaks him, and a feeling of cold, cold focus that has eluded him for decades. When he dreams now, it is not of the dead, but of the endless night between worlds, the deepest void where 1,000 threats drift, away from the light of loyal suns, the domain of aliens and monsters forced into exile by the Great Crusade, still crying out to be extinguished once and for all, the true threats to mankind.
True to the ideals of the Forgotten One, the Carcharodons maintain their vigil along the very edge of the galaxy, slaughtering the enemies of mankind with impunity and brutality. However, the main problem with the notion of the Carcharodons being founded by Sevatar is that the chapter has incredibly strong links to that of the Ashen Claws, one of the original chapters of the Loyalist Raven Guard Legion. The Ashen Claws, along with a number of other undesirable elements from the Raven Guard, would be exiled from the Legion following their reunion with their Primarch, Corvus Corax. As the Primarch began to restructure his Legion to more closely adhere to his own personal ideals, Corax believed that many of the more brutal and uncompromising warriors within the Legion, such as the Ashen Claws, had no place within it. And so, the Ashen Claws would be banished from the Raven Guard before making their way to the region of space known as the Ghoul Stars. This link between the Carcharodons and the Ashen Claws is further supported by the fact that the Forgotten One, who is so highly revered by the chapter, may in fact be the warrior known as Arcus Fahl, who held the title of Shade Lord within the Ashen Claws during the course of the Great Crusade. Given that the title of Shade Lord is also utilised by the current chapter master of the Carcharodons, Tyberos the Red Wake, combined with the fact that the Carcharodons are also in possession of the weapons known as Hunger and Slag, relics that originally belonged to the Ashen Claws, this would strongly suggest that the chapter had in fact splintered away from the Ashen Claws at some indeterminate point in time. Admittedly, however, the true genetic heritage of the Carcharodons remains a divisive issue for many Imperial scholars, with hypotheses ranging from Raven Guard, Night Lords, World Eaters, and even Chimeric Gene Seed being utilised by the chapter. Ultimately, while there is a minute possibility that Sevatar could somehow still be alive somewhere within the galaxy, it is equally likely, if not more so, that the Prince of Crows is long dead. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.